You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hey, Jack, how are you?
Hey, Tom. I guess I will see each other soon when your camera comes on. Is your camera on?
Yeah, my camera should be. It kicked me off for a second. There you go. Yeah.
Good. Wow. Thank you for coming in early. You look great.
Thank you, sir.
You've been doing a lot of travel, right?
Yeah, and I'm on the road now. I'm actually in Hartford, Connecticut.
Wow. So you get around a lot because we met in Mexico and for a week that's put on by a group called Modern Elders Academy, I guess, MEA, which is a Chip Conley production in which is a place that I've loved and gone to for the last 30 years. And as a kind of an interesting experiment, my wife and I said, Dr. Lee Suter and I said, hey, why don't we take a week and see what's going on there? Because we heard a lot of good things about it. And we met some great people like you. And I invited you on the podcast because you have such an interesting business and an interesting career. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Because you've done some fabulous things.
Yeah, it's almost like organized schizophrenia in terms of the pathways that my career has taken. The constant in it, Jack, has been that I've been associated with the military since I was 19.
Wow.
Okay. And started out in the Air Force. Okay. They educated me for my first degree. Okay. University of Alaska. And I was commissioned. Then, unfortunately, my father passed. And because I was a special operator in the Air Force, Tip O'Neill was a family friend, and he said, well, do you want to stay in the military or do you want out? And I said, I want to stay in. And there was no special operations groups in Massachusetts in the reserve, and I'm the oldest of 7 children. So what happened is arranged to resign my commission in the Air Force, accept a commission in the Army in Special Forces, and was a reserve officer and discontinued, retired from the military in 89. Okay.
Well, you became a colonel before you retired, right?
I was a lieutenant colonel, and then I got reactivated. I would do periodically things as a civilian contractor, as a consultant. I continued to hold a top secret clearance for many, many years because of DoD work, the consultancies that I was working with at the time, and then got reactivated in the military in 2007. I can't go into specific mission issues, but I go back and forth in terms of with rank as a colonel or as a civilian contractor, depending on the project.
So when you were in high school, did you imagine this military career, or did you imagine something different? I'm curious.
I didn't imagine at all going into the military, because when I was in high school, 1967, the Vietnam War was really kicking off.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I ended up going in at 19 because in my infinite wisdom, I had flunked out of 2 colleges. Okay, so there was no 2S deferment after 2 strikes. So so I decided to enlist, and my first war, if you will, was the Vietnam War. Okay.
Did you actually get to Vietnam?
Yeah, I was there, and I was injured, and so I was there. I was injured fairly seriously. Okay, and that led to some fairly interesting jobs after. But my catalyst for joining the military at 19 was I wanted some discretion as to what branch of service I've served in, what type of jobs I would have when I went in. And if you're drafted, you were automatically going into either the Army principally or possibly the Marine Corps as an infantry person.
But you wanted to get into the Air Force, right? That's what it sounds.
I wanted to get into the Air Force because of at the time at the time, the draft was a one-way ticket to Vietnam as an infantry person. Okay, that was basically what it needed to do. Now, this was before the lottery, obviously.
Right.
So the focus that I had was Air Force, so I could have some discretion. I kind of figured just basically because the war was ramping up that I would end up in Vietnam, but I wanted to go there. If I was going to go there, I wanted to go in the Air Force.
And did you want to become a pilot? Is that?
No. It was there had been, through the testing that had been done, there were things that would indicate that three things came out in the terms of the testing before I enlisted. One is I could function in isolation for extended periods of time. That was one. Mm-hmm. Second is that my psychographic profile was such that I don't panic easily. I'm actually rather calm when things get a little chaotic. And third is that I was very focused on completion of missions or tasks or whatever the profile was telling me. Mm-hmm. And all of those, frankly, were news to me. Okay? Right. Because, having flunked on in two colleges, really did feel like a failure. Okay. And thought I was the stupidest person on the face of the earth.
Well, maybe the professors weren't that good at
no, the professors were fine. It was me. It was me, because the next job, the next role that I had allowed me to attend the University of Alaska. And after Vietnam, after recovery from the wound, then on an intellectual basis, my message to myself, well, hell, how hard can Western Civ be after what you just went through?
Right.
And I was only 20, just turning 21. Okay. So I was able to, at age 23, I had 5 years in the Air Force, a college degree, and was a commissioned officer.
Nice.
That wasn't bad. I'll take it.
Yeah. And it's a lesson that you can pick yourself up from almost any, if you're resilient, you can pick yourself up, which is sort of a big trait for entrepreneurs. They have to be ready to fail. If you look at what happens to most entrepreneurs, they often fail over and over and over again. I mean, I can't tell you the number of entrepreneurs I've helped and met who literally fail often. Hopefully they fail fast enough that they can get back on their feet and not feel completely destroyed. And you're an entrepreneur because you started your own business, right?
Yeah, off and on. I think that the entrepreneurial piece that, I found did what a lot of consultants did, Jack. Okay. The jobs I had when my father passed. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I went back to Greater Boston, were in, I was going down three lanes at the same time. One, I was trying to be supportive of my family. That was one. Mm-hmm. Second, I was taking advantage of the GI Bill mercilessly. Mm-hmm. Okay. Racking up courses. I ended up getting 2 graduate degrees on the GI Bill.
Nice.
And third is back then there was a recession, 73, 74. And I started doing work in not-for-profits. I worked in 3 not-for-profits between 73 and 81 when I got my MBA, and then I entered consulting. Okay. Now, when I went into consulting, I did change lanes, if you will. Had my academics behind me, and the consulting opportunity gave me the consulting firms gave me the opportunity to experiment and frankly discover what I was particularly good at.
And what did you discover?
There were really 2 things. One is I know how to write. Mm-hmm. Okay. They were, because I had never had an opportunity to write when I was in the not-for-profits, and other than academia, none. One of the lessons learned was because the consultancy I was with at the time was called Harbridge House and was a Boston boutique. Mm-hmm. And they were looking at the writing samples, and my boss at that time called me into the offices and said, we can't teach people to be good writers. You have to find that discipline, but we can threaten you with you'll be fired in a year if you're not published twice.
That's good.
I kind of got the attention, and so that I built into it that, all right, now I need to do the writing. And so I learned the writing. The other thing that I learned is that through my curiosity about leadership as a discipline, and trying to focus on understanding how leaders behave, how leaders think, how leaders create, I realized that I actually, compared to most people, are rather intuitive. Okay, I can read situations, I can read simple people. I can have an organized way of thinking about what a problem is and what possible solutions could be. So both of those stood me in my career in consulting, which started out in a boutique in Boston, then went to a larger firm called Arthur D. Little, and left the country through expatriate assignments. That
was a big firm in the 1980s and 90s, right?
It was one of the bigger. Well, first off, it was the grandfather of all consultancies,
right?
Okay?
Right,
and it was hugely international. And if you showed a appetite for working overseas and, frankly, a desire to do it, all right, that they just put you on planes, okay, and they put you on planes repeatedly, and/or had you go live someplace, okay. And so, I had a chance to travel a lot. I lived in South America and lived in Caracas, worked in Peru, worked in Europe, so brief expats in Europe, but almost 4 years in Caracas. And then what happened is Arthur D. Little started to change. Okay. And the boutique I had been bought, the boutique I had been with, Harwich House, had been bought by PwC, and they recruited me back. And this is the issue here in terms of the entrepreneurs that I'm sure you're working with. Is there's a lot of boomerangs that go on among entrepreneurs. As they start out one place, they go someplace else, they go back, they may leave again and come back again.
Right.
And so I ended up going to PricewaterhouseCoopers, became a global partner there. Okay. And then Sarbanes-Oxley happened. And the group that I was in was sold to Bank of New York Mellon. And this, in fairness to Bank of New York Mellon, this was by no means their strategy was to buy the outsourcing parts of the business that I was in at PwC. Okay. Those the bundled service offerings could not continue under Sarbanes-Oxley, so they sold the whole cohort to Bank of New York Mellon. But the Bank of New York Mellon never knew what to do with the consulting part of the business.
Right. Okay. That happens.
So I stayed.
Then you have to bounce back from that, right?
Yeah, I bounced back from that by another boomerang. Okay, people that I had worked with at Arthur D. Little had started had joined basically a think tank that ran executive retreats, did executive coaching, and a lot of writing. Okay, so I joined them and was working doing that, giving speeches, writing articles, doing executive coaching of leaders. I mean, I was having a blast. Okay. It was also driven an awful lot by golf. So the retreats would be out your way, Pebble Beach, or South Carolina, Key Island. My first day with the company, I'm playing golf at Key Island. Not a bad first day.
Well, you became a golf person while you were in the military? Or where that?
No, Peter, I played golf. I dabbled in it when I was a kid. I was a country club kid growing up. My father was very interested in golf. PwC had golf memberships for partners.
Okay. That'll do it.
And I asked for the money, and I said, no, you got to take a membership. So I got back into golf back in my 50s.
This was you learning how to use the smarts of what you did with the GI Bill, but doing it with the golf memberships, like taking advantage of it.
There you go. There you go. Although I think that, the accountants and tax people spent more time on the golf course than we consultants, because we were usually on a plane for someplace.
Right.
But the think tank cratered because of the global recession.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And people were not going to be able to go to their companies and say, listen, if you don't mind, I'm going to go play golf at Pebble Beach and I'm going to listen to these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's going to cost X. All right. That just didn't fly. So and this is the issue here of boomerang. Okay. And it also extended into the entrepreneurial issue. And a philosophical piece that I have is you are only as successful as your networks.
Right.
Okay. Right. And that becomes a critical piece for entrepreneurs or in any profession, particularly professional services, law, accounting,
right.
Consulting, definitely.
Right.
So I'm literally closing out 2007, going into 2008, was unemployed. Was unemployed, and I could have gone back and started looking for using my networks to say, well, what are you working on? But they were probably in the similar circumstances to mine. And I figured, always wanted to do this. I was 57, 58 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And my backup, if it failed, which I never entertained the thought that it would, was I was going to be a night manager in a pottery barn. Okay. That was, I actually filled out the application.
Well, at least it wasn't Bed Bath and Beyond. They just filed.
Yeah, I know. I texted my wife, you got to use the coupons by Wednesday.
Is that right? Oh, that's funny. I mean, they do so many mailings, postal mailings. I guess they do electronic mailings too. But it was shocking when I heard that they were on the skids, because I thought that people loved that place. But I guess Amazon really wiped out a lot of that retail.
Well, I think that, I don't know enough about the case. I do know that they had a great business model in where we live, an awful lot of variety of things you really needed, but there were not a lot of people going to buy.
Right.
Okay. So
it reminds me of a store that's called the Container Store. Have you ever seen the store? Yeah. They just sell containers. And it's like, sure. You make a store that just sells containers, like plasticware, basically, of different types? Yeah,
but Jack, we're both old enough to remember that there was a thing called the pet rock.
Right, that's right.
And somehow there was a market for that too.
And the hula hoop,
the hula hoop,
absolutely. So getting back to your career, you eventually started your own consulting firm, your own firm.
Right. And going back to the networking piece here is the people that I brought. Well, first off, the people that I sold to,
mm-hmm.
Were people that were in my network from the previous consultancies in the think tank. Mm-hmm. And the key here was, for us, is we wanted to be differentiated.
Mm-hmm.
So when I created the company, I brought in a number of people who they became boomerangs working with me.
Mm-hmm.
They set it up as a virtual company with
mm-hmm.
memorandums of understanding.
Okay. So
no bricks and mortar, no infrastructure other than some finance and legal.
Right.
And essentially, just said, we're going to focus on research and leadership. And the research we're going to focus on is on leadership.
Okay.
That's it. And what differentiated us also was that there was a minimum age. You had to be 55.
Okay.
The other issue is, because we wanted to do leadership, that what we wanted to focus on was being as appealing as possible to the C-suite. Therefore, everybody who joined the firm back in the early days, and frankly now, has to either be living outside the States or have 10 years expatriate assignments.
Okay, that's an interesting twist.
Well, think about this. We just came back from Mexico from this retreat, okay? Mm-hmm. And we were surrounded by people who, for the most part, were global citizens, okay? Right. But if you look at the vast number of people living in the United States, even those that have passports don't use them much.
Right.
Okay, other than vacations. And our definition of multinational is liking Mexican food.
Yeah, like 80% of Americans don't have passports. Maybe it's even higher than that, right?
It's between 70 and 80%.
Yeah,
It's the last number. So huge,
pretty high number.
Huge. I mean, because there's enough different places you can go in the United States. There's a whole bunch of reasons why people don't go,
right,
or are curious about international. But if you're talking to a C-suite executive who he or she is managing or in a key position in a large global company, you want to be able to say, well, I've lived here, I've worked there, I've done it there. And that's been part of the profile.
Right.
And back to the research orientation is the other part of it is, well, if we're going to do research on it, we're going to have to write about it.
Right.
Okay. So if you look at the discussion partner community, a number of books by us, I've had 6, okay, and by my colleagues, their books. Also, we've gotten linked into, I'm going to go focusing on transitions as part of networking and mention the Modern Elder Academy. Is a huge part of what's going on now in leadership is all around executive transitions.
Right.
So what we also do is we affiliate with authors and thought leaders who write about things associated with transitions. Tammy Erickson, she was the one who recruited me to join Arthur D. Little. She recruited me to join the think tank. She wrote the McKinsey award-winning article on It's Time to Retire Retirement that turned into the Workforce Crisis book, 4 or 5 other books. Dr. Linda Grattan from the London Business School, Bob Morrison, who's connected with AgeWave. All of these are folks I've worked with. Okay. And it kept us focused on transitions as when we started, we were doing executive coaching on 2 levels. One was with high potentials. Okay. How are you going to get to the next level? And we had at that time, almost 30 years of research we had been doing jointly, okay, from various consultancies where we had worked together. So we knew what CEOs were looking for, okay,
right?
Because they told us.
Right.
All right. So we built our high potential development programs around that. We got into executive transitions by accident. All right. I can't mention the firm, but they wanted us to profile their membership of who they were selling to. And you design these pulse surveys, and our deal with agencies and things like that or associations is, we'll design the survey, you publish it, okay, but we want to look at the raw data.
Right. Data's valuable.
For us, because we wanted to understand, but the other is if there may be some things in there that our clients needed on leadership and high potential development. Right. So working in the C-suite in terms of behaviors and career management, and the high potentials in terms of career management was what we were doing. But the research that jumped out at us, and these are the discussions we were having down in Mexico, is you had this population of people who, in the profile that we had, that were over the age of 55, reasonably high net worth, and in organizations, okay, where they were senior people. And we were posing the question, okay, when are you going to leave? What are you going to do? And how will the company cope? Right. And it was a quick pulse survey that went out Thanksgiving of 2012. And what happened is you get 500 responses. That's statistically significant. You can draw some conclusions. We got over 2,000. Nice. Which to us was gold. Right. Because, but then when we started mining the gold, well, what did we learn from this? 58 to 62. That was the year they were going. Second is that they knew what their net worth was, and they had ideas where they were going to spend their time, but they had no plan. Right. Okay. And then the third issue here is that the companies were pretty much being kept in the dark about what their plans were because they didn't want to, next time somebody shook their hand, be looking for a pulse.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But three things we learned later. We went out to, at the time, very senior people we knew at places like McDonald's, FedEx, Hewlett Packard. All right, people who we had had contact with over the years, W.R. Grace.
Right.
And with this research, and we said, does this look like you?
Right.
And does this make any sense to you, folks? He goes, this is us.
Right. Right.
So we developed a transition service offering that is now the core business and probably the one we spend the most time on, where we work with the companies on their succession planning efforts.
It's interesting because I think of 58 to 62 as young, but I think a lot of people would say in corporate America, Fortune 500, Fortune 2000, it's probably still in that metric, right? Or well, maybe it's moving a little bit older these days. Well,
there's three things that are happening that began happening pre-COVID and now are accelerating due to COVID, based on our clients and based on the research we've been doing. Mm-hmm. Pre-COVID, there was something mystical about the age 50.
Right.
Okay. So you would be looking at somebody who was being targeted to do other things.
Right.
But he or she was looking at 50 as an inflection point.
Right.
And saying, okay, if I when I look at the horizon and my bosses, they're not moving anywhere. So if I'm ever going to leave, I got to leave now. Mm. And what was happening is that there were a lot of companies back 2017 and 2018 and into 2019 were hemorrhaging talented executives just because they were turning 50. Okay. So that was complicating the succession plan. During COVID, you had a lot of executives who came out of COVID with this attitude of life is too short.
Right. I agree. I agree 100%. Yeah.
So what was happening is we call it the divisibility factor, Jack, where the executives right now, instead of saying, okay, well, I'm going to leave in 5 years, they're saying I'm going to leave in 3.
Right.
Putting more pressure on the organization's succession plans.
Right.
All right. And there's 4 things that, that link into entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. Right? One is you are your own brand.
Right.
All right. Regardless of what you invented or what company you work with or what type of station that you have in life, you are your own brand. And the thing is, if you screw that up, it follows you forever.
Right. There's very hard, very challenging ways of repairing it, and they often don't work. They often backfire.
Well, you can attempt to repair it, but then that's all you're going to do with the rest of your life.
Look, I don't think the Fox organization's brand will ever get repaired now that they've been found guilty, at least in the public opinion, of defaming and disparaging this little voting company that had a total enterprise valuation of 80 million, but ends up with a damages award of 10 times that, which is like unheard of legally. I mean, I applaud the lawyers for what they were able to accomplish.
Well, and I think the lawyers are just getting started.
I know it's an amazing story, because if you're a 92-year-old like Murdoch is, and I guess he just went through a divorce, and I guess his latest fiance left him. It can't be an easy a sledding period for him, watching this empire that he built get attacked in so many different ways. One of their main people, Tucker Carlson,
he was fired this morning, as was Don Lemon from CNN.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me. Like, there's so much that happened during the Trump presidency and leading up to it. I said there's going to be books and courses about how leadership can backfire, I guess could be the title to the book, right?
Well, look at it. There's 2 books out there that talk about succession planning, leadership, entrepreneurial, that I think, and particularly on succession, how it's not handled well. One is, I think it's called Lights Out, about General Electric.
Right. Yeah, I've read that. That's a great book. That's a great book.
And the other one is Unscripted.
That one I haven't read.
That one was basically how owners, founders, if they're not close to their families and family-owned businesses, and particularly when the family-owned business is shareholders and diversification. And that one is really, really just one of those things. It'll make a great miniseries someday.
Well, maybe you could argue that's all about what Royco is in Succession, the HBO series that I'm sure you watch. I mean, last night's episode was great.
Yeah, it's just other than the swearing, there was not a lot of content. But
it's still so entertaining. It is so entertaining.
Well, the thing is that when you deal with Succession, as we do,
yeah,
it is always messy, messy, but and for three things, and I'm hearkening it back to the people who are your clients and to people who you interact with in terms of the entrepreneurial issue, and those people who are can translate their imagination into something useful and marketable. Okay. What you think about, Jack, is one of the reasons it's messy, particularly in larger companies, is the successors are not prepared.
Right.
Okay. I mean, one of the things when we started our service offering, which would have been 2013, was we kept hearing the same things because we would pose the question when we were saying, you have to protect your legacy. There has to be a soft landing for the company, for you, and for the person taking your place. And what we kept hearing was that the people who are coming behind me are not as strong. Okay.
Right.
And, first you get into this, okay, fine, great. Life as we know it will end when you leave, and let me know when Elvis gets here. But then we kept hearing it and hearing it and hearing it. And we said, well, why? Why aren't they as strong?
Right.
And what we kept hearing was, they're not global enough. We just touched on that. They can't write.
Yes.
They can do dancing animals on a PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay? And I think AI, that with all of this, give me a thought and I'll give you a term paper, is just compensating for the lack of ability to write.
Yeah, and it may be hurting the creative process of writing because people are using some of it as a crutch, maybe a lot of it as a crutch.
Yeah, I gave a couple of ideas to one of our people who all of a sudden had turned into a blog, which was much better than anything I would have written myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But we're not allowed to do that so far, unless some of my partners are sneaking around. But the other issue is they just can't write. And at the time, before AI has stepped in, you would ask a client for a white paper on the future of X.
Right.
They couldn't do it.
Right. Right.
The third thing is collaboration has been reduced to swapping emails.
Yeah, it's bad.
Or texts versus, we're old enough to having to go into a room and try to persuade somebody to a point of view.
There's no conversational ability anymore, Tom. It's like that scene in Succession where the guy Mattson says, the way this works is I say something, then you say something.
You're supposed to say something back, they're both staring at the guy like he's speaking Martian.
Yeah, exactly.
But the other one that presented a challenge for us because we did not know what our clients were saying, okay, yes, is they kept saying that they're not curious, they're not well read.
Yes.
And and what we found was that and this is I'm harkening back to how I got my start and how a lot of CEOs stay current, is they read biographies. Okay, now you pick up your phone. Okay, and there is all the news and you drill down. And even if you subscribe to things like The Economist and the Atlantic,
yes,
it's mostly headlines. You're not reading biographies of Winston Churchill about during the World War II when how he came out of the wilderness, having failed previously. How did he do things? When Franklin Roosevelt got wheeled into his first cabinet, how did he handle it? When Woodrow Wilson was trying to create a better world through the 14 points, how did he navigate it and not get his way?
Right.
And why did that happen? How did that happen? What were these folks thinking? There's tons of stuff being written by historians, John Meacham, Michael Beschloss, Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Right.
You mentioned those names to a lot of 30 and 40 something.
They don't know them. They don't know them.
No idea who they are.
They can't even recite who were the important presidents, other than maybe they'll say George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and they get stuck maybe JFK, and that's about all you can get out of them, right?
Right, but let's focus on this for a second.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that, and this back to Doris Kearns Goodwin, is one of the reasons that Lincoln was so successful is he knew that the abandonment of the Union was the wrong thing to do. He knew it.
Right.
And he had a number of creative ideas, or he thought they were creative, about how to deal with slavery, but he also thought slavery was wrong. Those are two things. Those are two principles.
Right.
But the people he had surrounded himself with, had all run against, for the most part, had all run against him for president.
Right.
And he just basically said, this was the concept of the team of rivals.
Team of rivals, right.
Okay.
Right.
And, so you've seen from a historical perspective how that worked. The other issue here is, and this is going to sound terrible, but, I'm not sure how far the Civil Rights Act would have gotten if President Kennedy had lived.
Right. I agree with you. I think LBJ was motivated to finish that legislation.
Yeah. And he was the master of the Senate. He came from the South.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But he also had a moral compass because he grew up in a poor area of Texas and he saw immigrant children undereducated, and he promised himself, they said, if I'm ever in a position to do something about this, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And he went against people who had mentored him, loved him, lost a lot of friends, but, he made those difficult decisions. And now we're in a situation, going back to the entrepreneurs, and going back to succession planning and going back to networking and bundling it all together, there is a certain tentativeness about doing the right things in the right way.
Right. Okay. And it's not getting better. It seems to be getting worse over time.
I actually think it's getting better.
Is it?
Yeah. I was looking at these two young men down in Tennessee. They got thrown out of their legislature for going against gun rights. Our generation has screwed this thing up pretty badly. Okay. And, when I'm looking at, contesting elections, when I'm looking at babies being, 9-year-olds being shot with assault weapons, and the Speaker of the House saying he doesn't have all the facts. Dude, what do you need? Autopsy pictures?
Right.
You get to the point where you're answering the question, where are the leaders?
Right.
And then when they're nominating themselves, and then you say, all right, well, maybe it's kind of not what I had in mind.
Right.
There's nobody living in the United States right now, that didn't come via immigration from somebody somewhere several issues ago, several generations ago.
Right.
And the fact that it's the third rail in leadership, and we're talking to people. Goldman issued a white paper back in May, and they drew a direct correlation to inflation and its consequence being a lack of a rational immigration policy. So while we're screaming and yelling about the cost of pork, and for a while there, the cost of gas, and about to take a vacation in Italy, the cost of the airfare.
Right.
Then you look at the chaos. As recently as this morning, I used to go to a certain Hertz site.
Yeah.
That is closed down because they couldn't staff it.
Yeah, isn't that terrible?
I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I did. Still had the reservation on the app to go to the site.
Right.
There's a guy calling me, working on the site, another site where I'm supposed to go get the car, which is 40 minutes away, going the wrong way. Ouch. So he's saying, we'll send a lift for you. Then he calls me back. They can't find a lift.
Oh, brother.
So I'm getting my car over an hour late.
Oh man, I hate.
And I go in and I'm about ready to,
scream,
go postal.
Scream.
Go postal.
Yes.
And then he said, then I'm dealing with this one guy sitting in the office, nice young man, apologizing. And I said, look, man, I'm running behind. I just need the car.
Right.
And he goes, well, Mr. Knott, I'm president.
Yeah,
so,
you're I know I've had that.
I read a lot of cars.
Yeah,
I read a lot of cars.
They're supposed to bring the car to you. They're supposed to bring the car to you.
Or at least have it ready.
Yeah, okay, I had that status for a few years. I remember that. They brought the car to you. That they used to do.
And then as he's following me out, I'm still apologize, says, we have another problem. There's no gas in it. I just
that torqued you. That torqued you, Tom.
Yeah, no, I just started laughing. I said, I woke up, I had a board meeting at 4:00 this morning in the UK on Zoom. And I thought, I really don't have a very good job, but compared to you, I'm golden, man.
Yeah. See, that's the MEA training of separating the thought from the reaction. That's perfect, right? We start drinking single malt for breakfast would, I guess, be the other option. But the thing is, you can't hold some young man accountable for things that, your rep didn't tell you that the place had closed, that, they don't work for Lyft. As a matter of fact, we got so bad that I ended up just getting a Uber myself to get there. I know that feeling.
So just trying to focus on the MEA experience that we shared and linking it into what I do for a living and, the trajectory of, my schizophrenic life. The four things that I came out of it with, that I'd love you to react to. Mm-hmm. One was, it was all about the people that we spent time with.
Right.
Okay. That the quality of the people, who were intellectually curious, trying to understand not only where their direction in terms of life was taking them, but also being supportive of the discussions with others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That, that the networking that just co-created to create a community of people who, for the most part, I don't think anybody really knew each other. And now there's been at least half a dozen interactions in 3 weeks.
Yep.
I don't know how sustainable that is, but I know it won't just stop.
Okay? Right.
The second thing is that what I took out of this experience was that everybody is going at their own pace within their own lanes.
Right.
Okay. And in discussion partners, we define the lanes as your family, your commercial activities, your intellectual pursuits, your passions, if you have them, and the lanes that are not making you money, but where you choose to stay involved, that make you feel relevant. Could be getting involved politically, writing, teaching, investing. Okay.
Right.
So what I was looking at, thinking of the people that we were interacting with, I was looking at people in different lanes.
Right.
Okay? But all in pursuit of trying to say, one of my brothers, number 6 in line, not a family person who that anybody think is a philosopher here. One of his favorite quotes to his brothers and sisters is, every breath we take leads us in the direction of the inevitable end that we all know is coming.
Right.
Okay. Right. And that was the other thing that I think this is where the MEA staff did just a magnificent job of not making you feel depressed about it, making you feel enthusiastic about it. And I think that was probably the biggest takeaway and epiphany for me is, I'm 73 and I'm still going strong. And thank God I have my health.
You look great, man. You look great.
Thank you. Yes, that Botox and single malt for breakfast thing. But the thing is, it's just your enthusiasm for life.
Mhm.
Okay. And there were people, Jack, you and I know, that arrived worried, arrived confused.
Mhm.
But I don't think anybody left less than hopeful. That's where I think that the signature came in. And then the last thing is, then how do you translate that into what you do and who you do it with, who you work with, your family, et cetera. Okay. And I think that's where the purpose of your podcast is. I had this experience. I'm talking to somebody else who had the experiences. What's the shared insights? And given that we've been on two different tracks in two different countries,
Right.
or parts of the country.
And you never have intersected, you never would have intersected, but now that you have intersected, it has a ripple effect that will undoubtedly boomerang, as you said, in different ways, because certain people will need succession services from a startup that grew from 0 to 600 or 1,000 employees.
Yeah.
And now the go-to person is you.
Right.
In your group at Discussion Partners, assuming the project is big enough and lucrative enough to be worth your time. But they do come up, and people are amazed at how those connections get made. And they wouldn't be made but for taking a week off and connecting with the community that you wouldn't otherwise have connected with. And that's a big difference than, say, the Facebooks and Instagrams and all these other tools that are out there. If the community is not really connecting in a deeper way, the connections just fray pretty quickly and become really inconsequential.
Well, they become, unfortunately, for a lot of people, unless you're working it, okay, then it becomes almost like, it's not that you're wasting your time. It's just, you think you could be doing something better with your time.
Right.
But I want to end the story on networking. Okay. Because I think that, when you're looking at the entrepreneurial piece, and I'm going to tell a shame on me story about myself.
Okay.
We consultants, we always have our lists, A, B, C list. A, people we're working with now, or people we're going to be working with. B, people we think we want to be working with. And C list, everybody who we've ever met. Okay.
Right.
Giving a speech or, you just have the ABC list.
Right.
And I mentioned living in Caracas back in the early 90s. And one of the markets that I was focusing on in the Latam area, Venezuela, Colombia, and Peru. And in Peru, one of my clients was the chief process officer for the largest bank in Peru. And she was she's a very difficult client, actually, but she was on my C list. And when you were on Tom's C list through literally a decade, you heard from me twice a year.
Christmas card?
No. Oh, God, no. God forbid I should expend that. It was, how are you doing? Fine. 6 months later, you may be interested in this article. Thank you. This went on for a decade.
Wow.
And 2007, when I founded Discussion Partners, I had a project that I would enter Colombia through Peru. Okay.
Right.
And so I started seeing my former clients. Okay. And because of the networking, I had never lost touch with them. Okay. So a number of them hired Discussion Partners. Peru, where I live part-time now, was not in a recession. But I started dating this former client, and we got married.
Nice. Wow.
So if I didn't have a C list, now this is, Jack, where I made my mistake. I wrote a blog talking about the importance of networking. Use myself as an example. My wife saying, how come I was only a C? And I'm saying to her, I didn't see you. I didn't see you for 10 years.
Wow.
Well, how come I wasn't to be? I said, I didn't see you for 10 years. We just had this email communication. Then, it gets worse, because our books are compilations of blogs that once we think, there's enough there, get edited and published. Right. And my wife, very, very smart, highly educated woman, has lived Italy, France, Spain, all over the place. She's one of the global readers of our content just after editing.
Wow. Nice.
The editor didn't do a great job masking what this particular blog was about, and she read it again. A couple of years later, it came back pretty slashed, Jack. Yeah, it came back. Instead of Tom, it was Tom had a friend. Yeah. So as you're talking to your clients and you're talking to your customers, there's networking, but give some thought to the diplomatic parts of that.
Absolutely. But we should do this again because you are a wealth of knowledge in an area that a lot of people are not paying attention to, but it's going to become, and it is becoming, and it has been, and it will always be very important in the way the business cycle treats the succession of its leaders. So let's plan on doing it again and maybe start talking about things like Unscripted and Lights Out, because those are great books. Right. At least Lights Out is, I'm sure Unscripted is as well. I'm going to pick it up and read it. And maybe that can even get into our book club at some point, because we are doing a book club. And I think the book club is an amazing idea and something that hopefully will keep the community going.
I will look forward to it on all counts. And please give my regards to Dr. Leah.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. Talk to you later, Tom. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.